So welcome. This is the fourth and final session of a very hastily organized mini-series called A World Without, which emphasizes the challenges faced by, but also the value of the arts and humanities subjects. This is what we like to think of as a taster session or a mini lecture or a provocation. It's something designed for general members of the public, but also perhaps prospective and potential students. And it highlights the excellent teaching and research that we have taking place here at Oxford Brookes University. As you can see from the screen, my name is Maya. I'm a research fellow for the Creative Industries Research and Innovation Network here at Oxford Brookes. The network aims to bring together researchers, practitioners, students, and general communities involved in the creative industries in the broadest possible terms. We are very welcoming and inclusive of any type of interpretation of creativity, and we try to engage with lots of different fields and disciplines and subjects. So today's session in particular is called Imagine a World Without Stories. And we are thrilled to have Dr. Miriam Johnson, who is not only a senior lecturer in publishing media, but also network lead for the Creative Industries Network. Miriam's professional career includes work as a secondhand bookseller. She was also the founder of the Istanbul Review, which, for those of you who are not aware, is an online publication bringing together writers, critics, and influential people from all walks of life, whose lives have been changed by literature and who, in turn, changed the world. Miriam has worked with the Scottish Pen, a not-for-profit organization that champions freedom of expression and literature across borders, and the Scottish Book Trust, a national charity promoting literature, reading, and writing. She has developed an immersive literature project in Edinburgh in conjunction with the Bridge Awards and Edinburgh UNESCO City of Literature, and her academic research blurs the lines between creative writing, publishing in digital social settings, and fittingly, she is currently interested in the role of the author by looking at the performance of authorship in cross-platform digital spaces.
The stories are the underlying aspects of the publishing industry, and stories underline quite a lot of everything we do, not just in university, but in life. And we're going to talk about that a bit as we go forward today. I was going to have a little bit about me, but I think Maya did vastly better than I was going to do in introducing myself. I guess the only thing I could add is that I look at social media, AI, performance, marketing, and other fun things around new technology and how that crosses over with telling stories. And the first thing I want to do, well, I guess the second thing today, is to start by telling you a story. So I want you to close your eyes and imagine a world where storytelling doesn't exist. It's hard, I know. We can barely untangle ourselves from our stories, and the history of humanity is the history of storytelling. But bear with me and try. So imagine you're at your desk in a job where you teach others to make reports, find facts, and list numbers. The walls are a light tan or white or maybe a gray, because colors elicit emotions, and emotions are often underpinned by a story we either tell ourselves or others to validate those emotions we see or feel. There are posters on the wall listing after-work activities and groups you can join in. There's football, tennis, running, but there are no book groups, no art societies, no cinema meetups. Not because these things don't exist necessarily, but because they exist in a way that is utilitarian, ways that provide facts and factual analysis without narratives, without the florid context, and that only provide kind of accurate scope. It hits 5 p.m. and you leave your cubicle, you ride the tube or underground home to your apartment, which is a plain square space that is devoid of the spatial storytelling of architecture. On the way, you sit quietly thinking over your day or staring at the passing stations, or you play a puzzle game on your phone. Without stories, there's no music, no entertaining books, and very few all-male podcasts being churned out. So once you get home and you meet your family, you take your dog for a walk while listening to the facts of the day and the weather forecasts for the week. You make dinner using a blog that only provides the recipe and notes on how to create the meal before you sit down and ask each other about their day, not elaborating on the answers before you then move to the sofa to practice a language you've been trying to learn using a version of Duolingo where Duo the owl is downgraded to only a logo and there are very few animations to sell you any product. Then you're finished with that and you flip on the TV, which it too is in grayscale because now all engaging visual media is in grayscale because color plays a powerful role in visual storytelling. Then you say goodnight to your kids. You recite them numbers 1 to 150 to help them fall asleep, and then you too go to bed. And that's the end of your day. Now, I admit some of these aspects sound appealing, but for the most part, it all sounds so very dull. And what we do at universities linked to this, and I found some really interesting information that I didn't go down a spiral of depressing information, but I touched the surface of it. Universities are making geographical cold spots. And the article that's linked to there says that universities are closing courses in the arts and humanities, and that will mean that poorer students are faced with geographical cold spots when it comes to accessing these degrees. Sheffield Hallam University, I think we all know, they suspended the teaching of English literature as a degree course, and a move the University College Union has condemned as shocking, depressing, and again saying it's more likely to affect students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Last year, I think it was, the University of Wolverhampton culled almost 150 courses, including those across the arts and humanities, all of the things that have storytelling at its heart. And as you see on the quotes there, the Times said that we should be cheering this because it means that students are getting into debt and going into the workforce with degrees that won't ever actually make them any money. So I'm gonna not go into pure anger mode here, but there's a lot of problems with the idea of undercutting programs that have storytelling at its heart. We've heard from Antonia Mackay on literature earlier. We've talked about creativity this week. And all of this is underpinned by stories. And it's not all bad. Graduates in the creative industries and those that are underpinned by this element of storytelling, they seem to be doing decently well. All of these stats are picked up from the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center. And they say that 93% of young people, well, young adults, say that studying those creative subjects impacts positively on their mental health and well-being. And we'll get into kind of the mental aspect and the health aspects of storytelling in a few minutes. It also, as you note there from the bottom two couple of bullet points, they make a little bit more, 2,300 on average per year when working in the creative industries if they have a degree that comes from that kind of background. And I'm giving you all this context, and I'm not giving you the whole in-depth context because you can go back and watch Antonia's slides and presentation, which I believe will be on YouTube soon, where she does delve into this aspect as it relates to literature and the humanities at university. But why does any of this actually matter? Because, as Barbara notes, we tell our stories in literature, art, architecture, and music. The humanities use these stories to create, communicate, preserve, research, and teach knowledge around our culture and creative records. And just when I was starting to think about this is a standard Google Scholar search that I did, and I found it really fascinating. All of these words as storytelling came up with huge numbers of hits. I mean, as you see, music comes up, technology has 884,000, but even things like maths, which has an extra zero on it, it's not that much. But then games and even anesthesia as storytelling comes up with article-related links 6,640 times. And I literally could have gone on forever with this, but I wanted to showcase here that if you wanted it to, almost everything can be rooted in storytelling. For instance, take this image. This image is a piece of artwork that draws on the implications of storytelling, the colors that are related to a mix of joy and sadness, and the gaps that are both within and without it really highlight where we are in the cultural sector. Now, I made all of that up, and it took me about 4 seconds to make this image because I made a mistake and I thought it was funny. But it leads to the fact that anything can have storytelling to give it context and some kind of authority, as it were. I'm not going to get into media and the authority related to storytelling of governments. That's a whole nother world, but something else to pay attention to. But I am going to go through a few different areas. So starting with history, our history, it's all storytelling. A Harvard art exposition of reading back in 2016 noted that if history is conveyed from the perspective of a character, whether he be genuine or fictional, the reader has little choice but to witness history unfold from the same point of view. And the history, it is the real work of museums telling stories that connect the people who are in the here and now to those in the past, to fill in the gaps. Sometimes we do get that wrong. We like to fill in the gaps with stories, and sometimes we fill those in incorrectly and ascribe to people different actions that they might not have had. But that's okay because, well, I mean, it's not okay historically, but it fills a gap in us because we are so much in love with storytelling that we don't think we need the real scientific reasons behind it. And Rosenberg has written a really interesting book about that, which talks about how actually none of this exists in the real world. The storytelling is just a sample of neurotransmitters in our mind. But that's much less nice for us to hear when we think about, no, history lives in this part of the brain, stories live in this part of the brain, etc. But as it says here, history is not the past. Well, it's not about the past, but it's about the stories of the past. If we are looking for facts, indisputable, undeniable facts, we have precious few resources about anything pre-20th century. And so we rely on imagination, guesswork, and narrative, because so much of our cultural understanding of particular historical periods comes from novelists. And Thompson goes on to say that, as George Orwell famously wrote, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. History can change based on who is in power. After all, history is written by the victors, which itself has pardon the pun, a storied history as a turn of phrase, and it's not necessarily actually related to something Churchill said specifically. If we move on and talk about different areas, storytelling is music. Music does quite a lot of storytelling, and when I speak of music, I speak of both lyrical music and music that is orchestral. Music helps us to understand the narratives being told, whether that's on stage or in the lyrics. In a study by Leonardo and pals, they found that with the help of music and sounds, viewers can understand better the story being created and have a more enjoyable experience while watching it, when speaking of kind of music involved with television and film and so forth. And then Amelides in 2016 talks about acousmatic storytelling, which integrates interviews, archival records, soundscape recordings, sonic icons, and musical quotations. And that makes the microphone become a time machine or a thought capturer and a conduit for conveying cultural information, elements of which, combined with kind of the sonic world composed in the studio, creates a hybrid form. As the acousmatic storytelling transmit a unique version of a story to the mindset of the listener, to the mind of the listener, who participates in the creation of the story and acts as a co-creator of that story as experienced. And as part of that, stories change the way we think. They change our brain, often for the better. And Zach here, who's written a book on this, goes on to say that we are social creatures who thrive on regular contact with others, and stories are an effective way to transmit even important information and values from one individual or community to the next. So they've identified oxytocin as the neurochemical responsible for empathy and narrative transportation in the brain. He said, my lab pioneered the behavioral study of oxytocin and has proven that when the brain synthesizes oxytocin, people are more trustworthy, generous, charitable, and compassionate. And he's dubbed the oxytocin as the moral molecule, or as others call it, the love hormone. So essentially, stories help us build empathy with others. And when we have more empathy, we can experience the trust that is built in telling these stories or even witnessing things happen. And then that triggers our bodies to release oxytocin. Seeing or doing good makes us more in love. And that's very much, as Zach says, related to narrative transportation or storytelling as connection. And part of that comes from storytelling as healing. And there's been a variety of really interesting studies where storytelling was used as a tool in hospitals to help people recover from surgeries and different administrations. So one of the studies, which I found really interesting, they had students or children have a storytelling session, and they found that it produced a biomarker changes in beneficial effects of storytelling in children. And that with one storytelling session with those children who had been hospitalized, it leads to an increase in that oxytocin and a reduction in cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and pain, and provided positive emotional shifts during a later free association tasks. And this is a case of formalized research done in storytelling in relation to how hearing stories targets real biological changes, and in faith-based storytelling, wherein healing of faith is based on those religious stories. So Singleton says that storytelling enables experiences to be made meaningful, and thus it's an important part of miraculous healing. So if one suddenly becomes well from an affliction and you have a faith-based narrative that you can tell yourself, it makes that meaningful and it makes it more believable, and it gives us something to hold on to. And then we go back to kind of storytelling as architecture. Architecture is an ever-present form of visual storytelling. The Plattman website suggests that the Sydney Opera House, there on the right, by Jorn Utzon, tells the story of the cultural and narrative landscape of Australia through its sculptural form that resembles sails or shells. It also reflects the architecture's vision of creating a democratic and accessible space for the arts. A narrative does not only embed the building into the environment, it turns the building into a landmark that can then in turn shape the landscape. And this is the process called narrative architecture. Building something that tells a story, which then embeds that building more into the lives and the culture of the people which it should serve. And then we have storytelling as, storytelling. It's a bit nail on the head, I'm sorry, but to give you a little context, stories sell well, essentially. 2023, it was a 6.3 billion pound industry. That's here in the UK. Trade fiction books have proved popular with successful franchises doing really well. And children's and YA books consistently dominate the bestseller list. And that could be because they come out in series and they often get translated into, adaptations of different sorts. We also, in the UK, have stories that the world wants. This is our export, other probably being a lot of China and India and other non-European countries, but we export a lot, 2 billion a year. Some of this I would imagine is also English as a second language text, because a lot of the world wants UK English, none of that American stuff. I feel sorry for my people. Yeah, so not only do we create a lot of stories and read a lot of stories and engage with them, we also provide a lot of stories for the rest of the world. And speaking of adaptation, there is a good reason why adaptations whether of books or pre-existing television series, is in fashion. So this article says that the fear of failure is a significant part of a commissioner's makeup, and that someone else's material, together with a package of on-screen and off-screen talent, provides reassurance. And how much easier is that than buying a completely original idea? We also really love nostalgia at the moment. We millennials and older have lived through so many world events that we are seeking out the comfort of nostalgia in our escapism. The cycles of fashion are also returning, and you can see how these things feed one into another. And there are many, many more much loved games to be adapted from an industry that is mammoth and growing. Worldwide, depending on which source you take, gaming is worth around 300 billion US dollars a year with more than 3 billion players. And because of technological advances that are helping to bring TV closer together to gaming, the technology that's being developed for creation of video games is now very sophisticated. And this video, by the way, is a Vulture article that just shows all the books that have been adapted to the big screen or TV in 2023. So publishing and the stories that publishing presents to the world comes out in a variety of ways and makes a lot of sense for industries that want to utilize already present content. So I'm not going to talk a lot about AI, but I think it's important to note that we'll have a question of, is the world without stories powered by AI? And I love this quote from Mellor: universities without the humanities will wreak havoc in our industry and produce generations of graduates AI could eat for breakfast. For those of you who are academics, you will feel this all too acutely after our last marking session. There are a myriad of tools out there for developing, editing, and working with stories in AI. And this is moving at pace. And this talk isn't about the value or not of AI as storytelling, but this slide is here to simply make you stop for a moment and think about what a future might look like if the role of art, humanities, and storytelling, is devolved for tools such as AI. On the surface, yeah, AI can read, write, and tell stories, but we still need a base level of stories or content for the AI to be trained on. So the questions will, perhaps, remain a theoretical one in a world without stories, because would AI teach itself to do so? Which links to the idea, and I didn't put this in the original list of things of Google Scholar searches, but coding is storytelling too, also known as software as storytelling. At first glance, coding and storytelling might appear to be worlds apart. One is a language of logic and commands, while the other thrives on imagination and emotion. Burke and Kafai go on to say that in the research that they did, kids grew exasperated by the coding process, and yet some were ready to start the new project altogether. And yet it was precisely at these times that the elements of storytelling that they already set in motion by doing vision boarding and storyboarding, that the primary incentive to keep participants engaged with their budding digital creations went back to those stories, and they became newly kind of keen on it, which is really cool. And then Ciancarini, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly, sorry for Italian people listening, they did an interesting article about literature reviews of everything that kind of talked about software, coding, and storytelling. And they looked at 51 publications overall. And they said, since in this paper, we're interested in the role of storytelling and software development, they focused mainly on textual storytelling, which can either be written or oral, or both, which is usually carried out via linear and non-linear narratives. And you can see how they broke it down here with the different types of storytelling they found in these considerations of software development as storytelling. And there's quite a lot actually in the way it crosses over and the places that it's being told. But the three things that they found that really applied to both storytelling and software development or software as storytelling is refining you both refine the planning and the analyzing of the storytelling and restructuring it in both areas. You facilitate requirements and decide which elements are important. So you have to keep thinking about where the market is and what they want. And then finally, they improve prototyping to engage the customers and users. You have a beta reader, someone who gives you feedback to make sure that it fits in right and is working correctly for the target audience. So what would we end up with without any stories in a world is a kind of what I consider might be a utilitarian hellscape, of which AI devised for me here using Midjourney. But the problem with this and with this concept is that every one of these images, all four of these, they tell a story. And it enables us to tell a story about them. And without that ability, that learning, the educational and system in place that helps people to learn and engage with empathy and connection with others as storytelling, well, I imagine we're in quite a pickle. But it's not all bad, as I mentioned. And I find this to be a really interesting thing that I discovered this week. There's quite a lot in relation to what I expected to find. Programs in the UK only at master's level that are doing some element of storytelling, whether it's plain storytelling or it's digital media, visual journalism and storytelling, immersive factual storytelling, which sounds very hardcore, or my favorite, narrative futures, art, data, and society, the MSc at Edinburgh University. So there's a variety of things happening within the university setting that is still telling or enabling us to tell stories and make those connections. Because telling stories is one of the basic qualities of human understanding, and we need that now more than ever, I think. And I have blasted through that. So that is kind of my overview of a world without stories. And I guess the takeaway is, and for what I specifically want to talk about with in relation to the publishing industry, is that publishing and media journalism and publishing is at the heart of all of it. It's what we do to create stories, to enable those stories to be more widely shared. And it's the basis of that human connection, which underpins everything else.